Some stories are so incredible they sound like fiction. This is one of them. It's the story of a man who found himself at the epicenter of a nuclear blast, survived, and then, somehow, did it all over again just 3 years later. We're going to dive into the absolutely unbelievable life of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Okay, so picture this. It's August 9th, 1945. A young engineer, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, is standing in his boss's office in Nagasaki. He's covered in bandages, suffering from severe burns, and he's trying to explain something that sounds completely insane, that just one bomb has completely leveled the city of Hiroshima. And right then, as his boss is looking at him with total disbelief, the entire room is flooded with a brilliant, blinding white light. The unthinkable happens again. A second atomic bomb has just detonated, and Tsutomu Yamaguchi is right underneath it. So, how in the world does one person end up at ground zero twice? To really get our heads around the impossible odds here, we have to rewind the clock by 72 hours, back to that first flash of light over Hiroshima. All right, so Yamaguchi was an engineer for Mitsubishi, and he was just wrapping up a 3-month business trip in Hiroshima. August 6th was actually supposed to be his last day there, but he had one of those small, everyday moments that changes everything. He realized he'd forgotten his personal stamp, his hunko, and had to go back for it. That simple act separated him from his coworkers and put him on a collision course with history. And in that split second when he saw the flash, something clicked. All those years of naval air raid drills just took over. He didn't even have time to think. He instinctively dove into a nearby irrigation ditch, clamped his hands over his eyes, and plugged his ears with his thumbs. It was pure muscle memory. And that one move, that single action, is what saved his life. You see, the ditch created what you might call a shock cocoon, a little pocket of space that shielded him from the worst of the blast wave and the heat. And even though he was less than 2 miles from ground zero, it was just enough. Now, he was still terribly injured. His eardrum was ruptured and the whole left side of his body was severely burned, but he was alive. So, he survived the initial blast, but what came next was something else entirely. It was a journey through a hellscape, a walk through a city that had, in a matter of seconds, basically ceased to exist. The world he climbed into was just a nightmare. The sky was black, familiar landmarks were gone, it was unrecognizable. He later described having to swim across a river that was just choked with bodies to find his colleagues, who, against all odds, had also survived. Wounded and in shock, the three of them started the long walk toward the train station. And in that moment, Yamaguchi became what's known in Japan as a hibakusha. Now, the literal translation is explosion-affected person, but the word carries so much more weight. It signifies a lifetime of suffering, both physical and social, that was really just beginning for him. And here's the really wild part. A train heading south was somehow still running. Yamaguchi got on board and spent the night on a horrific journey back to his hometown, Nagasaki. He got home on August 8th, and the very next morning, bandaged and badly hurt, he did what he was supposed to do. He reported for duty at the Mitsubishi office. Which, of course, brings us right back to where this whole story started. Surviving 2 atomic bombs was just the beginning of his story. Now he had to face a much longer, slower battle. He was up against an invisible enemy, the radiation, and all its devastating long-term effects. Just look at this chart. It really puts into perspective how mind-boggling his story is. In both cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he was almost the exact same distance from the hypocenter, just under 2 miles. I mean, the statistical odds of that happening well, they're practically zero. You just can't make this stuff up. And here's the truly heartbreaking part. The tragedy of the radiation didn't stop with him. His wife was caught in the radioactive black rain that fell after the Nagasaki bomb. And, as you can see here, both of them, and even their children who were born after the war, suffered from severe health problems for the rest of their lives. The fallout from those 2 bombs echoed for generations. For decades after the war, Yamaguchi almost never talked about what happened in Hiroshima. You see, in post-war Japan, being a hibakusha came with this terrible stigma. There was this awful, ignorant fear that radiation sickness was somehow contagious, or that survivors would have genetically damaged children. It made it hard to get a job, hard to get married. So, to protect his family, Yamaguchi's official survivor certificate only ever mentioned Nagasaki. But after all those years of staying quiet, something changed. This leads us to the final and maybe the most powerful chapter of his life, the one where the silent survivor finally found his voice. So what was the turning point? Well, tragically, it was the loss of his son, Katsutoshi, to cancer in 2005. That's when everything shifted for Yamaguchi. He started to see his impossible survival not as just some random, cruel twist of fate, but as a deep responsibility. He realized his story had a purpose. So at 90 years old, he stood up in front of the United Nations and delivered this simple, powerful message. It became his life's mission in his final years. He went from being this quiet engineer to a global advocate for nuclear disarmament. He also found another way to process the trauma, through a traditional Japanese form of poetry called tanka. The strict 31-syllable structure gave him a framework, a way to contain memories that were just too horrifying to talk about in a normal conversation. It was his way of managing a trauma that, of course, never really left him. So when we look back on this one singular, unbelievable life, what should we take away from it all? What is his ultimate legacy? Well, one key thing is that his survival wasn't just pure luck. It was this bizarre intersection of physics, terrain, and instinct. In Hiroshima, which is flat, the open irrigation ditch saved him. But in Nagasaki, which is hilly, it was the city's topography combined with a reinforced concrete stairwell that created another one of those life-saving shock cocoons. 2 different cities, 2 different shelters, same impossible result. Then, finally, in 2009, he was officially recognized by the Japanese government as the only survivor of both atomic bombs. And this is so important. He didn't fight for this for personal gain. He did it for the history books, to make sure the full, unbelievable truth was officially on the record for all future generations. This question really seemed to drive him in his final years. He went from being a victim of history to a witness for it, feeling this deep need to make the world remember the real human agony of these weapons, a reality he feared we were all forgetting. Tsutomu Yamaguchi passed away in 2010, at the age of 93. His life was this impossible bridge connecting our world directly to one of the darkest moments of the 20th century. He survived not just to tell a story, but to leave us all with a warning and a question about what we owed his singular memory. And that's a question we're all still responsible for answering.